Hello, welcome to Reality Part 1. This is our first step in the roadmap, describing a reality. We'll start by defining what reality is, and for our purposes, reality is something that does not depend on anything. So there is no cause for reality. We cannot ask why reality is like this or like that. Reality is a fact. It is what it is. That's where the questions stop. And by the way, this means that the following videos could be a bit dry because I will state the facts, describe this reality. But you can try and think how this described reality connects to our day-to-day life. And when we get to it in the video series, I think you will have at least one surprise. So if you noticed, I said a reality and not the reality. Why is that? There are a few reasons. The first one is that we are part of reality, and because it is impossible to step out of reality, our only restriction is that it agrees with our experience of it. This leaves the option of having different realities that have the same experiences. So we can describe a reality and we do not know if it's the reality or just a compatible one with it. The second reason is that in our context, reality is four-dimensional. So in order to visualize it, we have to look at a lower dimension model. We cannot imagine 4 dimensions, so we have to use a model for it. The third reason is that using simplified versions of reality makes the explanation easier to understand. So we will put some restrictions that do not appear in actual reality and describe a model of this restricted reality. Once we understand it, how it looks and how it behaves, we can lift some of the restrictions and see how the model changes. The fourth reason is a bit different, and it is that the reality described by general relativity does not go well with the theory of quantum mechanics. So even though it is highly debated what a quantum mechanical reality is, it is not a classical reality. And classical meaning the reality that general relativity describes. Now this is a bit of a problem because on the other hand it is widely accepted that everything is quantum. So the current common understanding is that a pure relativity classical reality is not the reality. It is not enough to explain all our knowledge. Okay, so here is a model of reality. It is a two-dimensional surface, so you have to imagine the grid lines representing a surface. And as we said, actual reality is four-dimensional, so we are missing 2 dimensions. However, this gives us the opportunity to look at reality from an imaginary outside perspective. This two-dimensional surface is also infinite, so you have to imagine the grid lines continuing indefinitely in all directions. And although infinity is something that we cannot really comprehend, it allows us to avoid some difficult questions like, does reality have a beginning, an end, an edge? And using infinity lets us ignore these questions, at least for now. You also may notice that I used a flat two-dimensional surface, and that translates to us dealing just with special relativity for now. Special relativity is a reality without gravity. Now, because our screen in front of you is a two-dimensional flat surface, we can choose to look at this model head-on and merge it with the screen. And in order to remind us of that, I will use these gray grid lines that do not exist. and are just a visual aid to remind us that the screen is our two-dimensional model of reality. They will also give us an orientation for our outside perspective of reality. So when we look from our imaginary outside perspective, we're looking at reality from a specific direction, and these vertical and horizontal grid lines capture this direction. Now, if we look at the point in this reality, it holds a list of attributes. If we look at another point, it also holds a list of attributes, and importantly, it holds the same type of attributes. And the same goes for any point that we look at in this reality. However, each point can have different values for the different attributes. So we can say that each point holds an ordered list of numbers. The place in the list tells us about which attribute we're talking about, and the number in that place tells us the value of this corresponding attribute. Notice that in this description, reality does not change. So each point holds certain numbers, the values of attributes, and that is that. So if we look at this point over here, it has an ordered list of numbers, and any time that we check this point, this will be the ordered list of numbers that it holds. At this opportunity, I want to stress out that this is just an example of a list. There could be more places or less places in the list, and there are a lot of options for the different numbers. So let's say in this place we can have only integers, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. In this place we can have numbers with an infinite amount of precision. Negative numbers are acceptable, 0 is acceptable. We can have an option, let's say for this place over here, to have only 3 options, 1, 0, and -1. That is the numbers that it can hold. So there is a lot of options for these lists, and this is just a representative of them. We will not really deal with these numbers. Going back to our unchanging reality, in physics, this is usually called the block universe. However, we do experience change, so we will have to explain how that happens, and we'll talk about that in the second part of the roadmap, the experience of reality. But I already want to point out that there are two we in this model that we're describing. There is the imaginary outside we, and there is a we that is part of reality, and this is the we that we are. So there are two different persons. And in this case, the we that we are talking about is the inside perspective we. That is the one that experiences change. Now I want to describe a similar picture, but using a different reality. So in this case, reality is a one-dimensional straight line. And just like before, each point on this line holds an ordered list of numbers. However, the value of the numbers change. So if we look at the numbers, they can suddenly change and continue to do so. Now, for us, change is associated with movement. When something is moving, it is changing. So we can think of the line as moving. And for the purpose of our model, we'll think of it as moving upwards at a continuous motion. So every time the line moves, the value of the numbers in the ordered list of numbers change. Now, the reason I said I'm describing a similar picture is because if we look at our two-dimensional unchanging reality description, then this new description of a one-dimensional straight line that is continuously moving covers all the points of this two-dimensional reality. So we are describing the same lists. Again, I want to stress out the difference between our two perspectives. The perspective that sees the movement of reality is the outside perspective, the imaginary outside person. And the inside person does not see reality move, it experiences change. Now let's move on to the big idea of science, and that is that reality is governed. So in a changing reality, this means there are rules, and these rules tell the points numbers how to change. In an unchanging reality, there are patterns, and the patterns appear in the spread of points numbers throughout reality's structure. So rules and patterns are basically the same thing. They tell us that reality is governed. Now, if we look at an actual reality scenario of a changing reality, we can say that it is a three-dimensional continuous structure. Every point holds an ordered list of numbers. The value of the points numbers can change. There are rules that have a separate existence of this reality, and these rules tell the numbers how to change. If we look at the actual reality scenario for an unchanging reality, we can say it is a four-dimensional continuous structure. Every point holds an ordered list of numbers, so similar to the changing reality. However, the value of a point's numbers cannot change. And there are patterns in the spread of numbers. Now for our video series, we will use the unchanging reality description, and that is because rules are not visual and patterns are. There are two other conceptual differences between a changing reality and an unchanging reality. The first one is a little bit philosophical. In a changing reality, the concept of change is recursive. So if you recall, I said that the outside person is the one that sees reality moving in the changing reality. But this means that this outside person has to experience change, because if not, it cannot experience movement. And this means that we have to explain how it experiences change. Now we can invoke another outside perspective of the outside perspective and say that it looks at this lower level as a moving level too. But then we'll have to do this indefinitely. So in order to avoid this, we need to say that change exists. And if change exists, we do not have to explain it. The second conceptual difference is that in a changing reality, we start from a reality existing, plus rules existing, plus, as we said, change existing. While in an unchanging reality, we only start from a reality existing. And the rules are imprinted into this existing reality. Of course, we also have to still explain how this unchanging reality gives us an experience of change in our day-to-day life. So to summarize, reality is points that hold an ordered list of numbers. The points' placement in relation to one another is continuous, so they form a structure. In actual reality, the points form a four-dimensional structure. So the points are placed in four different directions, one in relation to the other. We will use a model that is a two-dimensional slice from the actual four-dimensional structure. We will try and understand this two-dimensional slice and from it infer to the actual four-dimensional reality. In our description, reality does not change, so the numbers of each point are set. The ordered list of numbers are permanent for each individual point. We also assume that reality is governed, and we mentioned that it is important to notice that in our model there are two we. One is the regular self that has our experience, and one is an imaginary perspective that has an outside view of reality. In the following videos, we will pour some content into this reality and see the patterns that it has.